All right, welcome everyone. This is Megan Hagedorn from the Marks Group Live. Excited to be here today teaching Advanced Workflows Part 2 to you live and in person. Today what we hope to cover is the following. First, we're going to do a quick recap of Advanced Workflows Part 1. Then we are going to talk about why and how to use approval rules. Next, we're going to talk about why and how to use case escalation rules. And then finally, we will discuss schedules and functions, and we'll talk about what those are. So we will spend about 45 to 60 minutes going over the classwork, opening the last 45 to 60 minutes for chat discussion, where I can answer any of your questions provided by you in the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. We can also use that last hour to expand on any of the topics covered today in more detail if you like. If you're on a mobile device, there should be a chat window available as well, where I ask you to please place all of your questions during our class today. If by chance you're logging into the chat with Facebook, there is a small bug with the hosting company, which may make your chat window disappear. If that happens to you, do not worry, just refresh the entire web page in your browser and you should be good to go. By the way, that chat window will close after the class time is over, but I encourage you to continue asking questions for clarity on our main web page, where you'll see a chat option on every page. Just mention that you're asking a question regarding a class topic, and one of our trainers will be able to help out. If you are having any resolution or speed issues, please click the gear icon in the lower right corner of the video. While we recommend leaving it or setting it to auto, this will allow you to make things full screen or adjust the resolution if your internet speed isn't great today. Also, feel free to download and follow along with our class documentation. While it's not a manual, it is a nice way to follow along and reference after the class. Go ahead and scroll on the screen just a little bit to see the download link. So let's get to it. All right, we have our Zoho home screen here. And like I said, at first I just want to go over the kind of summary of what we talked about in the part 1 of this class, so you can know if you need to go back and reference it. And for both of these, part 1 and part 2, this is both for administrators or people with administrative privileges only. So if you're not seeing what I'm showing you on the screen, you might need to inquire about getting some more administrative privileges. Okay, so part 1 of this class, we talked about layout rules, scoring rules, validation rules, and assignment rules. And just really quickly, layout rules you can access by going to Customization, then Modules and Fields. Then you go to any module, wherever the layout rule should be. We'll go to Deals. And then we go to Layout Rules, this tab right here. And then we can see the layout rules that apply to the layouts that we have. In this case, we just have one layout. So you're not going to see a little drop-down option to pick the layout that these rules apply to, but otherwise that would be there. And layout rules help us define fields and sections that should be shown or hidden based on other criteria. So we made this example payment status. So when the payment status field is set to partial payment, and this is a condition that you set, and the amount is greater than 10K, in that case we want to show certain fields, show certain sections, and set certain fields to be mandatory. If it's less than 10K and the payment status is partial payment, then we just want to show these fields. And that's what that looks like. We can also see we have 20 actions left within this layout rule. So layout rules, like I said, they allow us to show or hide fields, show hide sections, and set fields to be mandatory or not based on certain criteria. if you set a certain section or field to be shown under certain criteria, it will otherwise be hidden, so just be aware of that. Next up, we talked about scoring rules. Scoring rules can be found under automation, then scoring rules all the way at the bottom. And here we can see we've got a bunch. You can set up scoring rules for leads, accounts, contacts, or deals. And scoring rules just allow you to set criteria and then assign a score, either positive or negative, addition or subtraction, depending on the criteria. And this allows us to quantify the records based on the criteria that we set. You can also retroactively apply scoring rules for all records, all historical records, by clicking this button. So if you set up scoring rules, but your CRM's been around for 2 years and you've got a ton of records already, never fear, you can retroactively apply them just by clicking this. So this is handy, and you do see a breakdown of the scoring rule in the record. So if we open up this record, we're going to see the overall score, the positive score, the negative score, etc. Okay, next we talked about validation rules. So I'm going to go back into our modules and fields customization area. And we will go back into deals, and we're going to find the validation rules section right next to layout rules. And the example that we set up was the state field, as in the address state field. And we just talked about how we want our data to be ultra consistent and reliable and good for reporting, good for grouping, things like that. So we want to say when the state field has more than 2 characters, we want this little error message to come up saying, please use the state abbreviation. So this is going to prevent people from typing in Pennsylvania, for example, instead of PA. So that's just one example of how this can be used. You can also specify if the rule should be executed when the criteria is met or when the criteria is not met. So just 2 different ways to think about that. The other example that we have is commission. So when the commission is greater than 5, we're going to get this this error message that pops up that says the commission must be less than 5%. So that's how validation rules work. They just allow us to kind of provide feedback to the user to make sure that the data they're entering is in the correct format. It's great for, like I said, is great for reporting, great for making sure the data is consistent that's being entered. Finally, we talked about assignment rules, and you can get to that by going back to our settings area, then under automation and assignment rules right here. You can assign records by whatever criteria you want to specify. Just know that this assignment rule area is going to only apply to records added using the import wizard. So it's not going to apply to like leads or whatever record you specify that you're creating manually within CRM, within Zoho CRM. This is only going to apply to leads added using the import wizard. You can set up a round robin feature. So it's going to go through this list and just go back and forth. you've got all sorts of options. So you specify the criteria, then you can specify how you want to assign those records. So in this case, we've got the state is Pennsylvania or Delaware or New Jersey. Then we want to assign them to this user. We can also associate a task with this. Otherwise, if the state is Colorado, then we just want to, or Utah, then we want to assign it to this other user. All right, so that was a quick summary, ultra quick summary of the Advanced Workflow Part 1 class. If you have any questions about that stuff, you can go back and check out the video from this morning where we went over all of those things. All right, so Part 2 of this class, the first thing we're going to talk about is the approval rules and processes. So we are going to go over to our setup area. And we're going to go to approval rules, which is found under automation. So we don't have any approval rules set up right this second, so we should do that. First, we need to select a module where this approval rule should apply to. Deals is probably going to be one of the most common selections here, but you can choose from really any of these, including any custom modules that you create. Then we need to specify a name for this approval process. So we will say deals greater than 50K. Then we need to specify when to execute this rule. We can either execute it on record creation or the editing of this record. We will say, we'll just stick with the record creation for this example. Then we're going to want to add rules to this process. So we just set up the approval process. Now we need to set up the rules that go within that process. So it's kind of a parent-child situation. And we can specify when to execute this right here with this drop-down, either create only, edit only, or create or edit. And now we can set up some different rule criteria. So here we want to say when the amount of the deal is greater than or equal to 50,000, and then we need to specify more than, or who should approve this. And I was trying to go back to show you can add more than one set of criteria here. So if the amount is greater than 50,000, then we want to specify who should approve this. We can choose from just a selection of users. We can choose from a role, like that. We can choose from groups. We can choose from levels. And we can choose from managers. if we stick to the users for just as an example, we can say the admin first, then we can add multiple levels of users, multiple levels of approvers, that is. So we can then go back and say VP of Sales. Next, we need to specify who of this needs to approve it. Is it just anyone on this list needs to approve this, this record, or everyone on this list needs to approve this record? If it's everybody, is it sequential or is it parallel? Meaning the TMG Live admin user can approve it at the same time that the VP of Sales user can approve it. So the VP of Sales user would have the approval option at the same time as the TMG Live admin, or is it sequential, meaning the VP of Sales user would not have the option to approve it until the TMG Live admin user approved it. And I'll kind of show you what that looks like. If we hover over this little information symbol, it gives a nice little graphic of those two options. And then we can assign the task associated with this approval. You can also easily create a new task right here. That's going to open up in a new little window here. Next, we can configure some actions upon approval. So we've got our approval. We're going to change this to the other user just for the purposes of our example here. But we are going to specify some actions upon approval. So after each approval takes place, we can update a field. So we can say for example, we can update the approval date and then have it set to approve on the day that it in fact was approved for the first approval, and then the day that it was approved for the second approval. This could also be some sort of drop down like approval status, and the value of first approval, you could say first approval received, second approval received, anything like that would make sense for this. So this is going to configure, again, this is going to configure this field after each approval. So after the first approval, it's going to set this date field to whatever day the most recent approval was. Then on the second approval, same thing. Then after each approval, or I'm sorry, after the final approval, we can configure another action. So we can assign a task, set up an email notification, call a function, or call a webhook. So we could configure a task that says proceed with the deal and let the deal owner know that this deal has been approved, you're good to go. We can also set up an email notification, like we've got this one here, deal has been approved. We can call a webhook. This is a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to set this up at the moment, but this would allow us to trigger all sorts of like web notifications to specific URLs. I think you can trigger a text message using a webhook. All sorts of stuff. And then finally we can call a function. We'll talk about functions a little bit more later today. But again, this is another kind of complex option, but if you want something to automatically happen, you can apply them here. And we can actually preview this email notification by clicking that little I button. And we've got our very simple email notification there. Similarly, we can set up a task. We can actually add a new task right from here. So we can say, deal has been approved. Please proceed. We'll leave that as is and then set the status to in progress. For example, priority is normal. And then you can notify the assignee via email. And the tasks that get created after all approvals have taken place, that gets assigned automatically to the record owner, as it states right here. We can also remind the assignee if we want, and then just add a description, but we can just save and associate that. Easy peasy. We also have the option to set up an action upon rejection. So if somebody rejects the approval or does not approve the record that you're working on, you can be notified via email, via a field update, or you can call functions or call a webhook. There's no task creation option here, but you can be notified via email, which is very handy. We can set the email to be sent to specific users. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we could do that, but it's either going to be the requesters manager, everyone who approved it, or the requesters manager and everyone who approved it. We can send a separate email to the requester themselves, which I really like. So I think this is pretty cool. So we can say we want to send an email to everybody notifying them of the rejection. We could create a email template real quick. Just do something basic. Just say deal, oops, rejected, please. Just as an example, deal rejected. We can actually type in the specific deal or deal information by typing in the pound sign. So we've got deal name has been rejected. We can say deal has been rejected. And we can just save that. We'll save this to the public email templates folder. And then we can click refresh to see the changes, and here's our template. We can either apply the same template or a different email template to this for the requester themselves. So you might want to keep these two notifications separate, or keep the specify a different template depending on whatever you're looking for here. So we can associate that, and then we can also update a field. So if we had some sort of approval status field, we could say if the approval status, if one of the options was rejected, we could set it to that. We don't have an approval status field, but we have an approval date field. That would not apply here. But yeah, something like that, like an approval status, and then set the value to rejected. That would be super helpful here as well. So if I click done, we're going to see a nice summary of the rule that we just set up. And this is for deals greater than 50K. We could actually add a second rule for deals greater than or equal to 500K, let's say. And in that case, let's say we want the CEO to approve it. So we can, just wanted to show that you can set up additional, more than one rule within a approval process, within a single process. So it'll go sequentially. So in this case, we've got, if you did have if you had a $600,000 deal, it first would go through this approval process, and then this one would kick in as well, where the CEO would have to come in and approve it, because we said the amount is going to be greater than 50K. We did not say greater than 50K and less than 500K. So we could do that as well. So we could say the amount is greater than or equal to 500K, and the amount is less than or equal to, we should just say less than, $500K. So if we went back in here, we would see, if you created a deal where the deal amount was somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000, then this approval process would take place. Otherwise, if it's greater than $500,000, then it would just go to the CEO, for example. So yeah, you can have more than one kind of layer to this approval process. And we can see this in action. We'll just save that. We can see this in action if we go and create a deal. Set the closing date, set the stage, and the amount is going to be 60,000. If we save this, we're going to see, because we set ourselves as the person who has to approve this first. I just wanted to show you what this looks like for the approver. We have the waiting for your approval status right here that pops up. We have the option to respond. Great job. From here you can approve it, delegate this approval to somebody else, or reject it. So we can say approved. And then we can see that this is waiting for the next approval in the process, the TMG Live Gen user approval. And yeah, so they would have to go back in here and do the same thing to approve it. And I believe that just, did we get a, nope, okay, that's fine. So this is what this looks like for the approver. This waiting for approval, we had the option to respond, and we did. The next thing we're going to talk about is case escalation rules. So case escalation rules can be found under the automation section, right here underneath assignment rules. And we've got a couple of things going on here. Just note that with escalation rules, you can only apply, or you can only have one active escalation rule per organization. So only one can be active at a time. However, you can have as many as you want. So, for example, we've got one activated already. So when we create this, it's going to be created but deactivated. We have the option to set it to active or not. So we'll say it's not active, that's fine. If we try to activate it, it's going to automatically deactivate whatever other case escalation rule was active. And this is kind of similar to the way assignment rules worked, where you have kind of a parent process and approval rules, where you've got kind of a parent rule or process and then child rules underneath. They calls them rule entries in this case. So from here we need to specify some criteria. This is a specific rule entry, so we'll say the priority, if the priority is medium, then we want to set some additional information on this, the rule entry details. Do we want to set the escalation timer, so to speak, by the created time or the modified time? So backing up a second, case escalation rules allow you to basically set a time limit to certain cases that meet the criteria that you specify. And if a case is not closed within the amount of time that you specify, then it gets escalated to the next, to whoever you specify. So it's really dependent, your selection here is just totally dependent on what you're looking for within your organization. If you want, all medium priority cases to be resolved within 30 hours, but high priority cases need to be resolved within 8 hours or they get escalated, something like that. You specify the created time or the modified time for that last time of escalation. So maybe you do modified time for the lower priority cases and created time for higher priority cases. So So we can go and click in here. And believe it or not, there's a third level to this where we need to add escalation actions. So here we can set the escalation action time. It goes up to 150 hours, and it's incremented by hour. We'll say that they have 48 hours to close the case. And if they don't close it within 48 hours, then it gets escalated, and we need to specify who should be escalated, or who this should escalate to. Blah. We can also set a template. This is an email notification. So this is the escalation in question. You can assign a different owner for the escalated case. So you can assign it to the same person that you escalate it to if you want, and then you can notify them and add additional emails as necessary here. If we go back to our escalation, our VIP cases rule here, and we can say, in this case, we want the priority is going to be high. So for high priority cases, then we want to base it on created time. And let's say, and again, we click on this to get into the rule entry, and then we need to add escalation actions from here. So you've got 24 hours for high priority cases from the created on date to close it. If it doesn't close within 24 hours, then we need to choose who to escalate this to. We choose the template for the escalation. And again, that's just an email notification. We can change the owner for an assigned case automatically and then notify them. And then you can add additional emails to that notification. So we can add more than one action here. So the first one was at 24 hours. So if it hasn't closed within 30 hours, then maybe you escalate it to a different person. And here you don't have the option to select from like a role or a team. You just need to select from user to user. So just be aware of that as well. So maybe you escalate it to somebody else, and maybe you've got a couple of different escalation templates, email templates, to kind of signify how intense this escalation is. But for this example, we'll just use the same one. So you can see we've got two different levels of escalation here, one at 24 hours, one at 30 hours, etc. And these are escalation actions that will occur if the case is not closed in that amount of time. We set the escalation times based on the created time for this one because the priority was high. However, we have a separate case escalation rule for the medium priority cases based on the modified time. So there are a bunch of different kind of levels to the case escalation rules and processes and how that works. So again, we've got the parent case escalation process, and then within that we've got different rule entries, and then within that we can specify some various case escalation actions based on different times. So we've got a lot of options here. And again, only one can be active at a time. You've got the options to just edit and delete them from here. And you can see when the case was created on. We can enable or disable the case escalation scheduler right here, which is going to apply the rules to your existing open cases. All right, so that is the kind of breakdown of case escalations. Finally, we've got the schedule function here. So schedules are going to allow you to automatically trigger functions on a schedule. This does only apply to functions. And if we go to, I'm trying to remember where it is. This is the beauty of the Zoho setup page. You can search for these things. Right, okay. So under the actions option here, under automation, we see we've got our functions library, our custom functions library. These are written using Deluge. Deluge is a Zoho specific programming language or scripting language. And it can get a little bit gnarly. So we're not going to go into this too much. We're actually going to have a separate, super advanced user class based on, based on these functions and Deluge, and we'll get into that specifically. But we've got some. All right, let me back out of here. Go back to our configure function. There is a gallery option, so you can select from pre-made functions here. So you can automatically close tasks of junk leads, for example. And we can edit the function, and this is what it looks like using Deluge. So it's it is definitely a scripting language. Make no mistake, it is getting into the weeds a little bit with, the specifics of a scripting language, and it's a little bit intense. But Zoho does have some great support on this, and this kind of builder is really nice. If you take a look at our documentation, you can also find some good resources for Deluge within our documentation there. But so you can peruse this gallery. You can write your own function using this kind of wizard thing, or you can view functions created by users within your system. So if we go back to, so that's functions. Now schedules, like I said, schedules allow us to schedule functions. Now I set this up a while ago. And this is the function that I created, which sends an extremely basic email to a specific address, and it's from the administrative Zoho user. The subject is weekly reminder, update Zoho, and the message is just please log into Zoho to update your records. So it's really simple. You can actually click edit there. Since this is a send mail function, we have some options here. You can add some HTML. So this is what that looks like. So let's assume that you have a function that already created that you want to execute. You can click create a new schedule. And then you can either select a function from the existing functions or by writing your own function. If we just use update Zoho, we don't have any CRM fields mapped because there's no arguments in the function. That's because it's just an email function. That's fine. And then we want to execute the start date and time. So I want to say I want this to happen every Wednesday at 10 a.m., kind of prime time, prime time working hours. And then we want this to happen weekly, but as you can see, you can have it set to once, daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. And then you can set the time at which it should end. You can activate it or deactivate it just by clicking here. We can see the next run date, and then the option to run now if it's activated. So we can deactivate that. And then you can see any failures from the schedules in this other tab here. We actually don't have any to show, but failures would show up here. If we hover over the schedule name, it's going to kind of give a little summary of what's going on, when it executes, who created it, and who last modified it. So that's how schedules work. And again, you can access your function library by going to Actions, and then going over to Functions, and then you can configure functions from here. Okay. So I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. Before we get to the Q&A section, if you have to leave early, please go ahead and check out the calendar section of our website to see upcoming trainings and what we'll be going over. If you have any suggestions for other classes or how to adjust this class topic, please email us at support@marksgrouplive.com. And if you can't stick around now for the Q&A session, you can also email us questions at support@marksgrouplive.com and we can answer them that way.